Hello there, and everybody's doing well, I hope, today. Um, I want to discuss something about memory or studying and learning. Because I've had a lot of students lately, somewhere along the line, in different contexts, make statements about the fact that they can't study with sounds. And I understand where that's coming from, and I've seen this a lot over the course of my academic career. But I was reading some studies that brings this into question. So I wanted to spend some time to discuss something about how the studies were set up. I know that's somewhat boring, but I think it'll make much more sense the end results if I tell you what's going on. So a particular instructor, in this case, it was a Stephen Smith, I believe, at Texas A&M University, and this was a long time ago, but has become somewhat of a classic study in the sense that people refer to it. And you may have actually read something about it somewhere along the line if you've done any kind of research in psychology, or at least reading in psychology, maybe Psych 101 classes kind of thing. But he took a bunch of students and put them into a classroom. As far as I can tell, it was a standard classroom, and had them memorize a bunch of words or nonsense syllables. I'm not exactly sure what they memorized, but they memorized some certain things for a specific period of time. And he had them do it over a couple of times. What was key about this one, and the students didn't realize what was going on, because when they came into the room, music was playing, at least for most of the rooms anyway. So they had no reason to think that this was part of the experiment. So they just walk in the room, the music was going, kind of like if you walked into the doctor's office or something like that, there'd be music in the background, or sometimes at the grocery store or whatever. So you don't really think about it. You hear it, but you're not aware of it. The key is to take a look at the different kinds of music. The words were the same. The time they got to study were the same. All of that was the same. The only difference was the music that was playing when they went into the room to do this memorization exercise. One of the rooms, or one set of people, had jazz music going on. Somebody else, I believe, had something that was more popular kinds of stuff. Somebody had more classical, and another group had nothing, total silence. So then they did their words, they come back a couple of weeks later. This time they switched the music for some of the students. So maybe somebody who started out in the room with classical ended up going into a room with jazz. Somebody who had jazz may have gone into silence. They switched them, except there was also one group that was in silence and stayed in silence. They did not hear any music at all. Okay? So that they swapped the kinds of music and the situations, the words and everything, the scenario was the same. The only difference was the kind of music that the students were listening to. The interesting result was that people who listened to the same music each time did better than those who had a mix of music. So in other words, if you had jazz the first time and went into classical, that seems to have made a change in the amount of words you remembered. If you stayed in jazz or stayed in classical or stayed in whatever music you listened to, students did much better overall. Didn't seem to matter which music. It was the fact that they seemed to have stayed with the music that was familiar to them, at least familiar in the sense that they'd heard it before. It may not have been familiar to them in the sense that that may not be the kind of music they normally listen to, but they'd heard it before when they were studying or memorizing these particular words. The group that did the poorest, by far, were the students who studied in total silence both times. Now, this puzzles people because they're not quite sure why, but given this study and a few others that are connected to it, it seems as if what happens is that when people are learning or studying or memorizing, depending on how you want to look at this, it's kind of what one person is memorizing might be somebody else is studying or learning. So I'm using somewhat these words interchangeably. That some of this seems to be stuck into the music or the words or something about the music. For example, you'll take the alphabet song. Those of you who were born and raised in the United States, you know the alphabet song so well that if you say the alphabet, you'll end up singing the song. There's something about that music, that song, that helped you learn the alphabet. The problem is now you can't basically say anything with the alphabet without the song. So there seems to be something about the music or the song or something in that, the rhythm, that helps people learn and memorize. Now, if you're trying to do something and you can connect it with the rhythm to the music, and you can connect something with a specific song because for whatever reason, maybe the two of them come together, or maybe you're talented enough to be able to create a song based on what you're studying, This seems to be really, really helpful. The idea that maybe the silence is a problem, and this is where we run into trouble, as I said, when I said so many of my students say that they can't study in with noises on around, and yet they say that this is where they study the best, which makes me wonder if what's going on is the different kinds of sounds that may be in the ambience. There may be maybe not music in the background, but maybe, say, a fan going on, or maybe they hear television in the other room or some such thing like that. The other part to it is I wonder if they would actually study better if they did have some sound, but the problem is they haven't had the right sound to study. So if, let's just say, and this is just an idea on my part, and I'm suggesting you of this to you so you experiment and see what works best for you. That's the whole point to this one. So that maybe you don't like classical music, but you happen to be hearing it because it was in school when you were trying to study. If you're listening to that music and thinking, I hate this music, I hate this music, you're probably going to have some carryover effect on whatever it is you're trying to study, and it's not going to work. If you've got something in the background that's not noticeable to you, it's maybe in the background, kind of like background sounds, kind of like many of you, when you go into an elevator or a grocery store or something, there may be music in the background and you're not even aware that it's existing. Until possibly what happens is when it suddenly stops and it's like, what's changed? Because you're aware that something's different, but you may not necessarily be that there was music and then there was no music. So it's possible that people can study with some light music in the background that's something that's familiar to them. So if you have a particular kind of music and you listen to this all the time, you might want something like that in the background quietly to see whether or not you do better with that than not. I'm suggesting here you play around with it and see what happens. Because the research has shown a couple of times with different kinds of studies. That's why I gave you this particular study so you could see, in a sense, what they were doing. But different studies have given situations in which there was one study in which they tried, this sounds horrible, but it actually wasn't in practice, but they put people underwater into a scenario in which they had music, not music, they could, in a sense, hear the water sloshing around them. It's kind of like they were in a bubble underneath the surface of water someplace. They did better if they had to take a test or were quizzed on that when they were again listening to water sounds and again underwater. You take that same group out, put them in a classroom on land, it was almost as if they didn't remember anything. So that there's something about the sounds and the environment itself that helps us learn. And this is why I said when you change your studies, look at things like, the knuckles, the clock on the wall. Because I know for a fact that if I've got, say, a clock up there and I'm studying a test or something like that, I will look at things and say, I see 3. So I'm thinking about, I don't know, the Pythagorean theorem or something. So that when I look at the number 3 on the clock, I start remembering the Pythagorean theorem because my memory is connected to what I'm looking at. The same thing seems to apply to what you hear. So if you hear some of the same songs, and some of you have had this happen before, you hear a song, you're going through the mall, you haven't heard a song, this particular song in years, and suddenly you've got flashbacks to something that happened 10 or 15 years ago. Our connections to those sounds are strong enough to bring back those memories because they happened when you hear the song in the first place. I'm sure that's happened to all of you at some point. So that maybe perhaps what may be happening for those of you who say you don't like to study with music, that may be. But you might want to try and see is if there's some other kind of sound, an ambient sound, maybe one of those noisemakers, not noisemakers, but those machines that basically creates, say, like ocean waves or just some kind of constant hum or something that might be something in the background that might be beneficial to you. You can get some of these online, I think, and even say like download on your phone that you play something like that and just see if having something like that. Now, the issue, however, is that when you're taking a test or needing to be tested on this material, say you're studying for your driver's test, going into a room and saying you want to have the ocean sounds in the background, it might not work. But what you may need to do, in a sense, is to kind of like hum it in the background or imagine it. Or again, as I said earlier, is to switch your flashcards or do something else like that to compensate for the fact that you don't hear the sounds anymore, or get it to the point that you change the position where you study, but have the same music going on or the same sounds going on, and see if for you The sound is the more crucial part, or the location is the more crucial part. Because then once you figure that out, or maybe it's the combination of the two, could be, that's a thought, that's a third possibility, is that once you figure that out, then you can start working on concepts and techniques that's going to help you keep it beyond the point of what you're trying to massively study for a particular test. Okay? Does this work? Does this help? Well, whether it works for you, I don't know. But does this help, and do you understand what I'm talking about? So you might want to just take a look at it. And the other part to it is those of you who are parents with children, you may not want to be so difficult about telling them that they can't have any sounds when they're studying. You may want to play around with this and see. The children might actually do better if you allow certain sounds in the background. Because even though years ago, decades when it was popular, some people did better with heavy metal in the background, though that seems to go contrary to what it might logically sound. But the idea is that they were used to it, they didn't hear it, and that became, in a sense, part of their consciousness, so it was easier for them to do it. Might not happen today, but it happened for a group of people. So, don't rule anything out until you've at least tried your own little experiments with it, okay? I hope this was helpful. Again, if you know anybody it might be helpful, send it on to them and let me know what you think. And if you've ever tried it, let me know what comes up out of it. Okay, we'll chat with you later and let me know what's going on. I'd really like to know. So have a good day and a good week, and we'll see you later.